Hi, I'm Clarissa Moll, producer and moderator of the Bulletin. Here's a short clip from one of our segments in this week's episode. In the last 2 weeks, tech giant Elon Musk has moved into the Eisenhower building on Capitol Hill and established himself as a force to be reckoned with in the new Trump administration. With permissions from the Oval Office, Musk secured entry to the U.S. Treasury's payment systems, giving him the ability to access millions of payments and private information. Now, Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, it should be noted, is not an actual department of the U.S. government, and it has taken upon itself the task of cutting the fat, as it were, from closing offices to offering millions of federal workers a buyout if they will quit by today. Never in the history of the U.S. has a private citizen wielded so much political power, and Musk's presence in the administration in the last 2 weeks has prompted a lot of fundamental questions about how our government works, how decisions are made, and who is ultimately in charge. Here to help us understand the dismantling we're seeing and Musk's role in it is Yuval Levin, the Director of Social, Cultural, and Constitutional Studies at the American Enterprise Institute and the founder and editor of National Affairs. Yuval, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
So, Yuval, it feels like every time I have read a headline about Elon Musk in the last week, I have sat there scratching my head saying, can he actually do this? What stands out to you most about Musk's actions since he sort of moved into Washington after the inauguration?
I think the first thing to say is that it's very hard to know what he's really doing. And it's increasingly clear that there is some distance between what he is saying on Twitter about his own actions and those of his team and what's really happening. And so I think we have to start with the caution that nobody's quite sure. Musk has been designated a special government employee, which is generally a title that the federal government gives to outsiders who offer advice. They're not usually people with the authority to act in government, but they serve in some advisory role. Maybe they're members of a federal advisory board, or otherwise they're brought in temporarily to offer some expertise. That they're a special government employee means they continue doing their other job. Generally, they're not paid much by the government. That seems to be how Musk's entire team is operating. That does give them some authority. It's not simply the case that they are private citizens acting here. They've been given a position in the federal government to do something. The question of exactly what is defined a little bit in an executive order from day one that created the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. Though, as you say, it's not a department. It's an office in the White House. It took over an existing office called the National Digital Service. And that means that the people who work there work for the president and ultimately can only act if they have the authorization of the president or of some other appointed or elected official. It's not entirely clear where they do and where they don't. I will say that the more we learn, the more it does seem like they have a formal role. So they're tasked by a cabinet secretary to enter the digital systems of a cabinet department, and they're not working entirely on their own here, but it's not quite clear what they're up to. I will say this is my impression, and it's only my impression, that more or less what they're doing is entering various kind of complicated federal payment systems and running the very sensitive and complicated payments data of those systems through an AI system, through an artificial intelligence system, in search of patterns of fraud or improper payments. That's not crazy. It's not some kind of coup. And I think to the question of whether they have the authority to do this, the answer is, well, if the president or a cabinet official says so, then they do. The president really does run the executive branch. So I think it may well turn out that this is more mundane than it seems. The idea that you're going to save hundreds of billions of dollars this way strikes me as implausible, but we'll see. But if you look at where they are, they're working in the Treasury at the agency, CMS, that runs Medicare and Medicaid. They seem to be looking at complicated payment systems on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're involving themselves in federal personnel policy in ways that I just don't think are going to amount to anything. That's not going to work. Federal employees are not Silicon Valley employees. We're going to learn today how many federal employees have taken this offer of a buyout. I think it's likely to be less than 5%. I'd be surprised if it's really more than 2 or 3% of the workforce. That's about the turnover you see in a normal year anyway. So I don't think that'll be the big deal. But what they're doing in payment systems is interesting. There could be legal problems, but I'm not at red alert on that. I'm at orange alert on that. I think that there's probably more authorization here, and there's probably more value to this than it has seemed in the first few days. But we'll see.
Well, when you describe orange alert, it begs the question, Yuval, what is setting you on red alert when it comes to Elon Musk on Capitol Hill?
Look, I think the basic fact that the richest man in America has an office at the White House and appears to have been involved in personnel choices and is very involved in directing the various agencies that regulate his various businesses. You know, his businesses are federal contractors, and they're also affected by federal regulations. And it's a very strange thing to do. This is not how our government should work. It's reminiscent of kind of late 19th century, railroad baron politics, which we look at those times now and we think, how could they have done that? That's an incredibly obvious sort of corruption. I think we're doing that again, and I think that corruption is going to be a watchword in the next 4 years. There's a real problem there. You look at the row of people seated behind the president at his inauguration. These are just the richest men in America who have a lot of business before the government and are affected by regulation in some profound ways. I think it's very strange, the role they have. The specific actions that Musk's people are taking, I just don't know yet, and I'm not sure that those are going to turn out to be the core of the problem. But the nature of his role is very peculiar. Are people who are using Twitter or X now comfortable with the fact that the person who owns that service is a government employee? Have we sort of thought through what we're doing here and what these relationships mean? I'm not sure we have. We're doing very strange things at the beginning of the Trump second presidency, but we'll see. So as I say, that worries me more than the idea that some team of tech bros is going to review federal payments for patterns of fraud. Maybe that could go wrong. Of course it could. Privacy issues and all the rest. But so far, I think that's at least defensible.
Russell, the response from House and Senate has been interesting. Democrats have been largely stunned. Republicans have been supportive or curiously quiet. Can you talk to me about those quiet ones? What's going on in their heads?
Well, that's what concerns me, is you have unprecedented power that no one is questioning, or if they're questioning it, they're not questioning it in a way that could lead to actual oversight and accountability. That's what is really strange here. And it's also, I would agree with Yuval about the sort of the robber baron era, except that what you didn't have John D. Rockefeller speaking to the AfD party in Germany and telling them to get over the guilt of their past generations in really terrifying sorts of ways. There are all kinds of powers now that robber barons would have loved to have been able to have all over the world that are really worrying to me. And that's true, especially when you start looking at the particular worldview of some of these tech leaders. I mean, Elon Musk has said that he's quite sure that we're living in a simulation. Well, I mean, that view of reality changes the way that you see human beings. It changes the way you see constitutional norms. It changes the way you see traditions. That's really troublesome to me.
Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.